there's no way that you can have false positive for COVID-19 when there was no COVID-19 prior to a few years back. So this was a coronavirus and coronavirus backbones that they used that came from the SARS and again, Dr. Mikovits can talk a lot more about this, and they've taken different components from MERS and HIV, orthologs, and used a chimeric process to create this COVID-19. Bottom line is, whatever it is, from my understanding, if you look at the various types of the causes of death, the various types of coronavirus in Iran, in Italy, and in Wuhan, and in New York, the comparison is, Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, but so far they're saying that these are all different strains of different derivatives of the coronavirus. Is that correct? So I can't see anybody that's actually demonstrated that COVID-19 has caused any death.
Well, that has to be about the most incendiary notion that we've heard in the 4 hearings. Thank you. In your view, what is the critical agenda behind what is clearly a global deception and fraud? And certainly you've spoken in those terms about it being a deception and fraud. But that being so, what in your view is the critical agenda?
Well, I think whether you take the prevalent virological model that's accepted today, or you take the more evolved virological theories that were introduced 100 years ago by Steiner and his work during the Spanish flu, I think the conclusion comes to the same, which is that blaming the current situation and past situations going all the way back to Zika and H1N1 and even previous to that, there is a sinister agenda to use a virus as a scapegoat for the actual intention, which is to reduce population. I'm not sure how else you could say it, to be politically correct, and I'm not politically correct anyway, so I'll just say it. But reduction of population control with the agenda of, with the weapon that they've used is vaccination, and it's been always, historically, it's always been used this way, and I think that we see this all the time being used by a lot of the regulatory bodies, but under the pretense of public safety, they justify the use of things that are clearly detrimental. And anybody with an objective mind that comes into this and looks at it from an unbiased perspective, whether you look at the clinical results, you look at the didactic research, whether you look at epidemiological studies, the conclusion is all the same. They haven't done sufficient safety components to essentially be able to establish safety. But then when you start to look at the pattern, any lip service that's given to safety is just for public appeal. It has nothing to do with the actual intent, because the intent is to do harm. And it's not an accidental side effect. They attribute certain things to side effects. These are direct effects, but because they're not desired, they label them as side effects, but they're direct. And based upon the last few years of my study, my observation, and just seeing the types of atrocities committed against not only mankind, but against the people that have gone out and spoken against us, like what happened with Dr. Mikovits and some other scientists, this is malicious intent to do harm. This is, I don't see the difference between this and premeditated murder.
So that being said, in your professional opinion, what possible relevance can the Center for Disease Control and the World Health Organization claim moving beyond this corona pantomime?
What role can it play? Is that what you said?
What relevancy can they hold if indeed they appear to be the smoking gun of a global pandemic which has collapsed a quadrillion-dollar planetary economy?
Their relevance is that they were, at best, complicit with murder, and beyond that they were responsible for the murder. They weren't complicit, they were accomplices. They propagated the agenda, they helped to legitimize it, they hid it, they suppressed the data, and this is not something that's just been going on now. I mean, you go back to the Tuskegee studies done 100 years ago or 80 years ago, whatever it was. I mean, it's an orchestrated, malicious, premeditated attempt to harm masses of people. This is, it makes Hitler look like a innocent little baby compared to what they've done. They have orchestrated the greatest atrocity ever committed, not in just recorded history, probably in the history of this entire planet.
Okay, and please do speak briefly about the importance, as you see it, of the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution.
Well, I'll tell you from my personal perspective, and I'll tell you from conversations that I've had with friends and associates over the last 6 to 7 years, and the global input that I've had from patients that I have now from 93 countries, as well as personal friends and associates, has been the same message. I hope you Americans understand the importance of this. I hope you Americans understand that if you give up your weapons, if the public is no longer armed, then as the United States sinks, as the United States goes, so does the rest of the world. And the United States has been attributed as the last beacon of freedom and the last hope for survival of the human race. And human species, I should say. And I thought there was some exaggeration in some of those comments that were made to me 6, 7 years ago. But as each year passed, it has become clearly evident that what has been happening right now is part of this agenda, which is a global agenda to, one, minimize the population, to ridicule those that speak out against it, and then usher in a dark age that would basically be the beginning of the end of the human race. And not understanding what even, I don't think that these idiots even understand the implications of what they're doing, because it's obviously going to affect their progeny either directly or indirectly later on. Regardless, it's a sinister agenda, and it's not about power, it's not about money, it's about something that is truly evil. And I know that in a court that they may not broach well, but there's no other way to really describe it. And as far as from a personal standpoint, they are soldiers and law enforcement in every nation that have put their lives on the line to protect humanity, to protect those that are underserved, to protect those that are weaker. And I think that this masquerade of, under the pretense of public safety, which again, that's a type of a public safety, that has now affected every soldier and every law enforcement individual in every country. It's affected their families. We need to now understand that if we're worried about somebody being broken into the house or somebody being murdered, what about the mass murders of people, tens of millions of people? The planet's population would probably be a few billion more if it hadn't been for this orchestration and the systematic elimination of human life over the last 3-4 decades.
Thank you. And it was not lost on me that I think it was yesterday that the iconic U.S. prosecutor Trey Gowdy said on air when he was asked, what do people do when they find they're essentially under house arrest and their lives are collapsing about them? What is the recourse? He said civil disobedience, pure and simple. That is the last resort. And I must say I was delighted to have heard that, and not least following from President Trump, who himself appeared to support that notion in the last couple of weeks, inviting people to take to the streets. Of course, anyone who speaks like that is immediately demonized. Police stopping people in the streets in England, walking their dogs, calling them murderers and saying you're killing people. It's just insane what has occurred, and yet here we have it. Robert, are there any questions you have for Dr. Rashid?
Dr. Buttar, from what I get, you've created an indictment. Do you have any thoughts on whether the alleged virus is an exome, or if 5G is lowering immunity, or if there are other complexities here that should be brought forward, perhaps in questions by the other members of the commission?
Absolutely. The introduction of the thought process that viruses are the cause and are dangerous and that they should be eliminated from the body is absolutely ludicrous. Again, if you look at Steiner's work and you start to understand really